In 73 BC, 70 gladiators broke out of a kitchen pantry in Capua, armed with cooking knives and roasting spits. 2 years later, 100,000 of them controlled half of Italy. And Rome, the Rome of Caesar and Cicero, had to invent a new kind of army to stop them. To understand what happened in 73 BC, you have to understand what Rome had become. By the 1st century before Christ, the Roman Republic was the largest slave-holding society in the ancient world. Decades of conquest, Carthage, Macedon, Greece, Asia Minor, had funneled millions of captives into Italy. Whole regions of the south were now worked by chain gangs. Sicilian wheat fields. Campanian vineyards. The mines of Spain. Estate owners in Rome had never been richer. Slaves had never been more numerous, or more cheaply replaceable. Twice already, the system had broken. The First and Second Servile Wars in Sicily, decades earlier, had cost Rome tens of thousands of lives before being crushed. Rome convinced itself those revolts were a Sicilian problem. An island problem. They had no idea that the Third Uprising, the one we still talk about 2,000 years later, was about to begin inside a single building. A gladiator school. In a town called Capua. Capua, 70 miles south of Rome. Famous for two things, perfume, and gladiators. Inside the ludus of a man named Lentulus Batiatus, roughly 200 fighters trained every day under wooden practice swords and iron collars. Thracians. Gauls. Germans. Captured soldiers and condemned criminals, kept alive only to die for an afternoon crowd. One of them was a Thracian. Historians believe he had once served as an auxiliary in the Roman army before deserting, being recaptured, and sold into the arena. His name was Spartacus. He was not a prince. He was not a freedom fighter in the modern sense. Plutarch describes him simply as a man of great spirit and bodily strength, more cultured than his condition. What Spartacus wanted, evidence suggests, was very simple. He wanted to get out of Italy. To go home. In the late summer of 73 BC, he and roughly 70 others, Plutarch counts 78, Appian about 70, planned to do exactly that. Their plan was betrayed. The guards came for them. So they ran for the only weapons they could reach. The kitchens. The cooking knife pantry. About 70 men armed with cleavers, spits, and iron skewers fought their way past the guards, out the gates, and into the night. On the road outside Capua they did the one thing the Republic could not yet imagine. They captured a wagon of gladiator weapons being shipped to another arena. Real swords. Real shields. And from that wagon, 70 men with steel, the story breaks open. They went uphill. Vesuvius was not yet the volcano of history's nightmares. It would not erupt for another 152 years. In 73 BC, it was simply a steep wild mountain above the Bay of Naples, ideal terrain for fugitives. Rome's response was casual. A revolt of cooks and gladiators. A police matter. They sent a praetor named Claudius Glaber with 3,000 men, not even a proper legion, to seal off the only known path up the mountain and starve the rebels out. Glaber camped at the base of the trail. He waited. He never thought to look at the cliffs. Spartacus's men cut down wild grapevines, plaited them into long ropes, and at midnight, historians take this directly from Plutarch, they rappelled down 100 meters of volcanic rock face. They came in behind the Roman camp. They killed the sentries before the alarm could be raised. They took the camp, the supplies, and Glaber's standards. The praetor barely escaped. In one night, 70 escaped gladiators had become a small army with Roman weapons, Roman armor, and the confidence of having beaten the legion of the most powerful state in the Mediterranean. Rome sent another praetor. Spartacus crushed him too. By the spring of 72 BC, escaped slaves from across southern Italy were pouring into his camp, field workers from the latifundia, herdsmen from the hills, women and children. Tens of thousands. Rome upgraded the threat. They sent the consuls. Both of them. With 4 full legions. Spartacus split his force, drew the legions apart, and beat them in detail. In a single campaigning season, the gladiator who had escaped a kitchen pantry had mauled 4 Roman armies. The Senate stopped sleeping at night. By the end of 72 BC, Spartacus had done something no foreign enemy had achieved in 2 centuries. He had moved his army the length of Italy, and he had marched it north. His destination was the Alps. This is the strategic moment that defines the man. Cross the Alps, and his Gauls go home to Gaul. His Germans go home across the Rhine. His Thracians, somehow, find a route back to the Balkans. The slave armies of Italy walk out of Roman territory entirely. He reaches the river Po. The mountains are visible. The road to freedom is open. And then, for reasons historians have argued about for 2,000 years, Spartacus turns the army around. He marches back south. Into Italy. Toward Rome. Why? Some sources say his men refused to leave. They had grown rich on plunder, drunk on victory, unwilling to face the snow of unknown passes. Others suggest Spartacus considered marching on Rome itself, and decided the city was too well defended. Still others believe he had a new plan, to reach the southern coast, hire pirate ships, and ferry his people across the Adriatic to freedom in the east. We will never know for certain. What we know is this. The army that could have walked out of history, chose to stay inside it. And inside Italy, a man was rising who had been waiting his entire political career for exactly this kind of crisis. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus. The richest man in Rome. Crassus was not a soldier by temperament. He was a real estate magnate. He had made his fortune buying up the burning houses of his political enemies during the civil wars of Sulla. But when the Senate, in late 72 BC, gave him command of 8 legions and a free hand against Spartacus, Crassus did something the previous Roman commanders had not. He took the rebellion seriously. He started by punishing his own men. When one of his legates was defeated by Spartacus and the men fled the field, Crassus revived an ancient and almost forgotten punishment. Decimation. 1 man in 10, chosen by lot from the units that had run, was beaten to death by the other 9. Several hundred Roman citizens executed by their own comrades. The message to the rest of the army was simple. You will fear me more than you fear Spartacus. Then Crassus drove the rebels south, into the toe of Italy, the narrow peninsula of Bruttium, and trapped them there. He built a wall. Roughly 50 kilometers of ditch and rampart, sea to sea, across the entire peninsula. A line of fortifications meant to do one thing, make Spartacus's army starve in place. It nearly worked. Winter set in. The rebel camp grew hungry. Crassus's legions watched the watchfires every night and waited. But Spartacus, even cornered, was still Spartacus. On a stormy winter night, the rebels filled a section of Crassus's ditch with earth, brush, the bodies of dead pack animals, and their own dead. They charged across. About a third of the army broke through before Crassus could close the breach. Spartacus was out. But now he was running. And from the east, sailing back from Spain, came another Roman general who smelled glory. Pompey the Great. Crassus understood. If he did not finish this war before Pompey arrived, Pompey would steal his triumph. He drove his legions north. The chase was on. In the spring of 71 BC, on a river plain in southern Italy called the Salaris, Crassus caught Spartacus's army and forced battle. The night before, according to Plutarch, Spartacus was offered a horse by his men. He drew his sword instead, killed the horse in front of them, and said, if he won, he would have plenty of fine Roman horses, and if he lost, he would need none. At dawn, he led the charge. He was last seen, according to Appian, cutting his way through the Roman ranks toward Crassus's command tent. He was never seen alive again. His body was never identified. The man who had broken 4 Roman armies, who had marched the length of Italy, who had nearly walked out of empire entirely, disappeared into the chaos of his own final battle, and the Romans, who would have paraded his corpse through the city if they could have, could not find him. The men he led were not so fortunate. About 6,000 of the captured rebels were nailed to crosses along the Appian Way, from Capua to Rome, the same road they had marched out on. 200 kilometers. A crucified body roughly every 35 meters. Travelers walked past them for months. It was, in the precise Roman sense, a message. The Republic had not just won. It had answered the question every slave in Italy might ever ask again. Don't. And one more humiliation, just for Crassus. Pompey arrived in time to mop up a few thousand escaped rebels in the north, sent a letter to the Senate, and claimed in writing that while Crassus had won the battles, Pompey himself had pulled the war up by the roots. The rivalry that would help end the Republic, Crassus, Pompey, and eventually a younger man named Caesar, was born in the smoke of that final field. Spartacus is often remembered as a man who tried to end slavery. He was not. Evidence suggests he simply wanted to take his people and go home. What scared Rome was not his philosophy. It was the arithmetic. 70 men in a kitchen had become 100,000 in 2 years. The Republic ran on a base of human chattel so vast that even one charismatic Thracian, with vine ropes and stolen gladiator armor, could pull the whole structure to the edge of the cliff. 8 years after the Salaris, Spartacus's old prosecutor Crassus would be killed by Parthian arrows in the Syrian desert. 22 years later, Pompey would be murdered on an Egyptian beach. And the Republic itself, the one Spartacus had so badly frightened, would fall to a single man named Caesar, and become an empire. If this changed how you see Rome, subscribe. We reconstruct a lost world every week.